The sound of clinking tools and the smell of oil filled the air as Derek wiped his hands on a rag. He had been working at the small-town motorcycle shop for nearly 8 years. Every morning started the same way. Coffee from the old vending machine, a nod to his co-workers, and then hours under the hum of engines. Derek loved it. Fixing bikes wasn't just a job for him. It was something he was born to do. The shop was in a quiet town on the edge of South Dakota, a place where everyone knew everyone. The road stretched long and empty, perfect for bikers. On weekends, the sound of engines echoed through the valley as riders passed through. Most stopped for fuel, a quick meal, or sometimes for a repair. That's where Derek came in. He wasn't the kind of man to talk much. He let his work speak for him. People would bring in broken-down bikes, and somehow, he always found a way to bring them back to life. His hands were rough, scarred from years of turning wrenches, but they moved with the precision of someone who truly loved what he did. Derek had learned the trade from his uncle, who used to fix bikes in a small garage behind their house. As a kid, Derek would sit for hours watching him work. He remembered how his uncle would say, "A motorcycle's just like a person, son. You gotta listen to it first before you try to fix it." That stuck with him. Even now, whenever a bike came into the shop, Derek would listen closely before touching a single bolt. Despite his skill, life at the shop wasn't always easy. The owner, Frank, was an old-school kind of man. He'd been running the place for decades. He was proud of his business, and though he wasn't cruel, he had a way of making Derek feel like he didn't fully belong. Sometimes Frank would make small comments, never direct, never harsh, but enough to remind Derek that no matter how good he was, he'd always have to work twice as hard to be respected. Derek didn't let it show. He needed the job. It paid the bills, and he had dreams of one day opening his own repair shop. He'd been saving for years, putting away every extra dollar he could. On weekends, he'd help neighbors fix their lawnmowers or tune up their cars for a few extra bucks. His small house sat on the outskirts of town, and in his shed he kept a few old bikes that he restored bit by bit. It was his escape after long days at the shop. Most of the other mechanics were friendly enough. There was Tom, who'd been there the longest, and Mike, a young guy still learning the ropes. They all joked around, listened to the radio, and swapped stories about bikes and road trips. But every now and then, Derek noticed how the room grew quiet when certain customers came in. Some folks in town still looked at him like he didn't belong there. He wasn't one to argue or fight back. He just kept working, proving himself through the engines he brought roaring back to life. One Monday morning, as the sun was barely up, Derek unlocked the garage door and flipped on the lights. The smell of grease and metal greeted him like an old friend. He liked coming in early before anyone else. The quiet gave him time to think. He poured himself a cup of coffee and looked at the old poster on the wall, a picture of a man riding a Harley down an open highway with the words, "Freedom is found on 2 wheels." Derek smiled. That's how he felt every time he heard an engine purr again. As the morning picked up, Frank came out of the office holding a clipboard. "We got a few jobs lined up today," he said. "Couple of oil changes, a carburetor rebuild, and a busted clutch on that blue Honda." Derek nodded. "Got it. I'll start with the Honda." Frank looked at him for a moment. "You always take the hard ones," he said, half smiling. "Just make sure you don't spend all day on it." "I'll have it done before lunch," Derek replied, already rolling up his sleeves. Hours passed, and the shop buzzed with noise, tools clanking, air compressors hissing, engines starting and stopping. Derek lost himself in the rhythm. It was peaceful in its own way. When he worked, the world faded out. It was just him, the machine, and the sound of turning metal. Around noon, he sat down for lunch on the back steps of the shop, watching the trucks drive by. Mike joined him, holding a sandwich. "Man, you ever take a break from fixing stuff?" He laughed. Derek grinned. "Not when there's work to do." Mike shook his head. "You're something else, man. Frank should give you a raise." Derek just shrugged. "He pays me fair enough. I'm just doing my job." But deep down he knew he deserved more. He'd seen new hires get paid almost as much as him, even though they still asked him for help every day. Still, he didn't complain. He figured that one day, his time would come. The day rolled on without much trouble until late afternoon, when a loud rumble came from the street outside. Everyone looked up. The sound grew louder until a massive Harley-Davidson rolled into the lot. The bike gleamed under the sun, but it was sputtering badly, coughing out smoke. The rider wore a black leather jacket covered in patches, the most noticeable one being the red and white logo on the back. Frank froze for a second when he saw it. "Well, damn," he muttered. The bike came to a stop and the rider killed the engine. He took off his helmet, revealing a weathered face, a thick beard, and sharp eyes that looked like they'd seen too many miles. The shop went silent. Even the radio seemed to lower itself. The man looked around, then said in a deep voice, "Need a hand. My carb's acting up." Frank stepped forward, cautious. "We don't usually take club bikes," he said slowly. The rider raised an eyebrow. "You don't?" "Thought this was a repair shop." No one said a word. Derek could feel the tension in the room. He'd heard stories about motorcycle clubs like this one. People said they were dangerous, unpredictable. But looking at the man's bike, dirty, worn, but clearly loved, Derek didn't see trouble. He saw a machine that needed help. "I can take a look at it," Derek said quietly, stepping forward. Frank shot him a look. "You sure about that?" Derek nodded. "A carb issue's not that bad. I can fix it." The rider studied him for a moment, then gave a small nod. "Name's Rex," he said. "Appreciate it." Derek just said, "Let's see what's going on," and wheeled the bike toward his station. The rest of the crew watched in silence. Mike whispered, "Man, you're brave." Derek just smiled. "It's just a bike, Mike." But even as he worked, he could feel Frank's eyes on him. There was something about the way the boss looked that made him uneasy, like he was waiting for something to go wrong. Derek focused on the engine, checking the carburetor and adjusting the mixture screws. The Harley coughed, sputtered, then roared back to life. Rex grinned, the kind of smile that showed real respect. "Didn't think anyone around here knew how to tune an old Evo engine like that." Derek wiped his hands. "Just takes patience," he said. "She's got a few miles left in her." Rex nodded. "You're good. Real good." He handed Derek a folded bill, but Derek shook his head. "Just doing my job." Still, Rex placed the cash on the counter before putting on his helmet. "You ever need anything, you let me know," he said before riding off. The shop stayed silent for a moment after he left. Then Frank walked over, his face tight. "Next time, ask me before you take something like that," he said. "I just fixed his bike," Derek replied calmly. "Yeah, well, we don't need that kind of crowd around here," Frank muttered, walking back to his office. Derek stood there for a moment, unsure how to feel. He'd just done his job, helped someone who needed help. But somehow it felt like he'd done something wrong. He didn't know it yet. But that simple act would soon change everything. That night, as he locked up the shop and walked to his truck, the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky orange and gold. Derek looked back at the garage, feeling a strange mix of pride and unease. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. All he knew was that he'd fixed a bike, done the right thing, and that was enough for now. He drove home with the windows down, the wind brushing against his face. Somewhere in the distance, he could still hear the faint roar of a Harley fading into the night. The next morning started like any other. The sun was already bright over the town, casting long shadows across the lot. Derek arrived early again, sipping coffee from his thermos as he opened up the garage. He liked the quiet before the day began, before the sound of air tools and laughter filled the shop. It was his moment of peace. When the others arrived, the usual noise returned. Mike was talking about some race he watched on TV. Tom was complaining about the prices of bike parts, and Frank was already pacing around with a clipboard in hand. Derek smiled quietly and got to work on a bike that had come in late the night before. A scratched-up Yamaha with a leaking fuel line. He was under the bike, tightening a clamp when he heard the low growl of an engine pulling into the lot. It was deep and steady, the kind of sound that made people turn their heads. Derek stood up and wiped his hands on a rag just as the front door swung open. The man who stepped in wore the same black leather jacket from the day before, the one with the big red and white patch on the back. It was Rex. The room fell silent again. Frank stepped out of his office, his face stiff. "You again," he said slowly. Rex nodded, his eyes calm but direct. "Bike's still giving me trouble. Carb's fine now, but she's leaking oil. Figured I'd come back to the guy who actually knows what he's doing." Frank's jaw tightened. "You could have gone somewhere else. We're pretty busy here." Derek didn't say a word. He looked at Rex's bike outside. It was a beauty under all the dust and scratches. A machine that clearly had stories to tell. He felt drawn to it. Rex looked straight at Derek. You got time to take another look? Frank started to answer, but Derek beat him to it. Sure, he said. Pull it around back. Frank turned sharply toward Derek. We've got other jobs today. I'll stay late if I have to, Derek replied quietly. Frank sighed, rubbing the back of his neck, then walked back toward his office without another word. Rex rolled the bike inside, parking it by Derek's workstation. Up close, Derek could see the patches on his jacket, some old, some newer. They looked like badges from years on the road. Rex's hands were scarred, but his grip was steady as he leaned on the bike. Appreciate you taking the time, he said. Most folks get nervous when they see this jacket. Derek smiled slightly. I don't fix jackets. I fix bikes, Rex chuckled. Fair enough. As Derek checked the engine, Rex stood nearby, watching. The two didn't talk much at first. Derek was focused, wiping down the oil line and inspecting the gasket. After a few minutes, he said, You ride long distances often? Used to, Rex said. These days I just ride to clear my head. Been through a lot of towns, but this one's different. How so? Derek asked, tightening a bolt. Rex shrugged. Quiet. Feels like everyone's watching, waiting to see who you are before they talk to you. Derek understood that feeling all too well. Yeah, he said softly. That's how it is around here. They exchanged a look, just a small moment of understanding between two men who both knew what it was like to be judged before being known. By the time Derek finished, the Harley was running smooth again. The oil leak was fixed, the pipes gleamed, and the engine hummed like it was new. Rex ran his hand along the tank, nodding with real respect. She sounds right again, Rex said. You got a gift, man. Just experience, Derek replied. Rex smiled and reached for his wallet. How much do I owe you? Derek hesitated. Frank handles payments, Rex frowned. Well, he didn't look too happy to see me. Don't take it personal, Derek said, trying to keep things light. Frank's old-fashioned. Rex put the cash on the counter anyway. Make sure you get your cut. Then he handed Derek a small silver keychain shaped like a wing. Lucky charm, he said. You've earned it. Derek looked at it for a moment, surprised. Thanks, he said. Rex nodded once, then rode off, the Harley roaring down the road until the sound faded into the distance. The moment the door shut, Frank came out of his office, face tight with frustration. What did I tell you? He said sharply. Derek looked up. You told me to do my job. I did. Frank pointed toward the window. That man's trouble. You don't get it. We don't want people like that hanging around here. They scare off real customers. He needed help, Derek said calmly. I helped him. That's all. Frank shook his head. You think he's just some guy with a bike? You don't know what you're getting into. I know what a broken gasket looks like, Derek said quietly. And I know how to fix one. For a moment, neither said anything. Then Frank muttered, Next time you let me handle people like that, and walked away. Derek stood there, his hands still greasy, feeling a mix of anger and confusion. He didn't understand what he'd done wrong. The man came in, asked for help, and left satisfied. That was the job. That's what he'd always done. Later that evening, after the shop had closed, Derek stayed behind to clean up. The others had already gone home. The sun was setting, and the light coming through the windows painted everything orange. He sat on a stool, turning the small silver keychain in his hand. It was simple but well made, and he couldn't help but smile a little. He thought about Rex, how he'd talked, how he'd looked at him like an equal, not just another mechanic. It was rare. Most customers didn't see the man behind the wrench. As he was locking up, Frank came out of his office again. You still here? Just cleaning up, Derek said. Frank folded his arms. Look, I know you mean well, but you need to be careful. Those club types, they're not like regular folks. You don't want to get mixed up with them. I'm not mixed up with anyone, Derek replied. He came in, I fixed his bike, he left. That's it, Frank sighed. You're a good worker, Derek. Best one I've got. Don't ruin that over something you don't understand. Derek didn't answer. He just nodded, though he didn't agree. Frank walked out the back door, leaving Derek alone in the quiet shop. That night, Derek couldn't sleep. He kept replaying the day in his head, the way everyone stared when Rex walked in, the tone in Frank's voice, the look of respect in Rex's eyes. He wasn't sure why it bothered him so much, but it did. Maybe it was because he'd spent years trying to prove himself, and still, One simple act of kindness could be twisted into a problem. A few days passed, and life went back to normal. The shop stayed busy, the same routine as always. But something felt different. Derek noticed how a few customers mentioned that biker who stopped by. Some spoke with curiosity, others with unease. One afternoon, as Derek was adjusting the brakes on a scooter, a black pickup truck pulled into the lot. He didn't think much of it until he saw Rex climb out again. Frank stepped outside almost immediately, his expression tight. "You back again?" he asked. Rex nodded. "Just wanted to thank your guy here," he said, gesturing to Derek. "That fix you did, it held up great. Bike's running like new." Frank forced a smile. "That's good to hear. But we're busy today, so—" Rex ignored him and turned to Derek. "You got a minute?" "Sure," Derek said, wiping his hands. "I wanted to ask," Rex continued, "you ever think about running your own shop? Someone like you shouldn't be working under somebody else." Derek laughed softly. "That's the dream. Just need a little more time, a little more money." Rex nodded thoughtfully. "If you ever need a customer, you got one. And probably a few more." Frank's face darkened, but he said nothing. Rex tipped his head, got back in his truck, and drove away. The silence that followed was heavy. Frank turned to Derek, his tone sharp. "You need to stop talking to him." "He was just being polite," Derek said. "This isn't about being polite," Frank snapped. "It's about reputation. People see those types hanging around, and they'll stop bringing their bikes here." Derek looked at him steadily. "If doing my job right scares people off, maybe they weren't real customers to begin with." Frank didn't reply. He just walked away, slamming his office door behind him. Derek sighed and went back to work, but the air in the shop felt heavier than ever. He didn't know it yet, but the line he had just crossed, standing by his work and his principles, was going to change everything. What felt like an ordinary day had quietly set off a chain of events that neither he nor Frank could ever take back. A few days later, the morning started quietly. Derek was wiping down his workbench when Frank came out of the office holding a piece of paper. His face looked tired, like he hadn't slept well. The shop was already humming, Tom tuning an engine, Mike sorting through tools. But the mood felt off. Frank walked over to Derek. "Got a new job for you," he said. "Big one." Derek nodded. "What's the problem?" Frank handed him the paper. "That same biker came back. Wants another tune-up and maybe some upgrades. He called early this morning." Derek took the slip, reading the notes. "Did you tell him to come in?" "Yeah," Frank said flatly. "He's on his way now." Derek glanced up, a little surprised. "Thought you didn't want him around here." Frank rubbed the back of his neck. "I don't. But business is business. Just keep it professional, all right?" Derek gave a small nod. "Always do." It wasn't long before the rumble of a Harley echoed through the parking lot. Rex rolled in, his black jacket gleaming in the morning sun. The same patch stretched across the back, bold and unmissable. A few people from the gas station across the street stopped and stared. Rex parked his bike near the door and walked in, giving Derek a small grin. "Morning, man. You busy?" "Never too busy for a good bike," Derek said, smiling back. Rex laughed. "Glad to hear it." He looked around at the others who were pretending not to stare. "Didn't mean to cause a scene last time." "You didn't," Derek replied. "Some folks just like to whisper." Frank watched from the office window but didn't say a word. Rex leaned on the counter. "So here's the deal," he said. "She's been riding rough lately. Think the clutch is slipping, maybe a belt issue. I trust you to figure it out." "All right," Derek said, already wheeling the bike toward his station. "Let's take a look." As Derek worked, Rex stayed nearby, chatting easily. He talked about the roads he'd ridden, the storms he'd driven through, and the sunsets he'd seen from his bike seat. Derek listened, drawn in by the stories. There was something peaceful about the way Rex talked about the open road. It reminded Derek why he loved bikes in the first place. After a while, Rex asked, "You ever ride?" Derek smiled. "Used to. Haven't had time lately." "You should," Rex said. "Nothing clears your head like a long ride. It's like the world slows down and all you hear is the wind." Derek nodded, tightening a bolt. "Yeah, I remember that. The repair took most of the afternoon. Derek worked carefully, cleaning every part, replacing a worn belt and adjusting the clutch until it felt brand new. He checked every inch of the bike like it was his own. Frank came by a few times, watching but saying nothing. He didn't like the attention the bike brought, but he couldn't deny that Derek was the best man for the job. As the sun started dipping lower, Derek gave the throttle a twist. The Harley came to life with a smooth, deep roar. The engine purred like it had been waiting for this moment. Rex grinned wide. "She's perfect," he said. "You nailed it again." Derek smiled, wiping his hands. "Just needed some care. She's got a lot of miles left." Rex pulled out a thick envelope and placed it on the counter. "That should cover everything, and then some." "That's too much," Derek said, trying to hand it back. Rex shook his head. "You earned it, and I don't argue with good work." Derek hesitated but finally accepted it. "Thank you. I appreciate it." Rex leaned in a little. "You ever need anything, tools, space, whatever, don't hesitate to ask. You've got a friend now." Derek nodded, touched by the gesture. "Thanks, man, that means a lot." When Rex left, the shop stayed quiet for a long moment. The sound of his bike faded into the distance. Then Frank stepped out of his office, walking toward Derek with a strange look on his face. "Did he just pay you in cash?" "Yeah," Derek said, still holding the envelope. "He paid fair, maybe a little extra." Frank's mouth tightened. "We don't take cash from people like that." "Why not?" Derek asked. "Money's clean, work's done." "Because I said so," Frank snapped. "I'll handle this, give me the envelope." Derek frowned. "He paid me directly. It's for the work I did." Frank took a step closer. "You work for me, not for him. The payment goes through the shop." Derek hesitated but finally handed it over. Frank snatched it, muttering something under his breath, and went back to his office. The rest of the day dragged. Derek tried to stay focused, but something about the whole situation didn't sit right. He'd done his job, same as always, and yet it felt like he'd stepped into something bigger than he realized. When the shop finally closed, Derek was the last to leave. He turned off the lights, locked the door, and stood outside for a moment, breathing in the cool air. Across the street, the neon sign of the diner flickered. He thought about going in for a bite but decided to head home instead. That night, as he sat at his kitchen table eating leftovers, his phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. "Thanks again for fixing her up. Ride safe, brother." It was from Rex. Derek smiled, setting his phone down. It was nice to be appreciated for his work. The next morning, things took an odd turn. When he walked into the shop, Frank was already there, pacing. The envelope from the day before sat open on his desk. "Morning," Derek said cautiously. Frank looked up. "Morning," he said shortly. Then, "You know that cash?" It bounced. Derek blinked. "What do you mean it bounced?" "It was cash," Frank scowled. "I mean, I called the bank. The bills are fine, but there's no record of the payment, no invoice, no paperwork. You made a deal off the books." "That's not true," Derek said calmly. "He paid for work done. You took the money." Frank's voice rose slightly. "You went behind my back. You've been too close to that guy since the start." Derek's stomach tightened. "Frank, come on. I did what I always do. I fixed a bike. You're turning this into something it's not." Frank slammed the desk with his hand. "You don't get it, do you? People like him, those bikers, they bring trouble. I can't have my shop mixed up in it." Derek stood there for a moment, silent. Then he said quietly, "All I did was my job. If that's a problem, maybe the problem isn't me." Frank looked at him for a long second, his face unreadable. "Go home, Derek. We'll talk tomorrow." Derek nodded slowly and walked out, his chest heavy. He didn't know what to make of it all. It didn't make sense. How helping someone could lead to so much tension. As he drove home, the sun was low on the horizon, painting the fields gold. He thought about his uncle's words. Listen to the engine first. Maybe it wasn't the engine that was off this time. Maybe it was the world around him. That night, as he sat in his shed, surrounded by tools and half-built bikes, He thought about his dream of opening his own place. Maybe it was time to stop waiting. Maybe it was time to start something of his own, somewhere he didn't have to explain doing the right thing. He didn't know it yet, but the next morning would change everything. One small decision made out of pride and honesty was about to turn his quiet life upside down. The next morning, Derek woke up early, but for the first time in years, he didn't feel like going to work. The air outside was heavy with fog, and the silence in his small apartment made him uneasy. He sat on the edge of his bed staring at his work boots. His mind kept going back to what Frank said the day before. "Go home, we'll talk tomorrow." Those words felt like a warning. Still, Derek couldn't stay away. He loved that shop. It wasn't just a place to earn money, it was where he felt alive. Fixing bikes gave him purpose, made him proud. So despite his worry, he grabbed his thermos and drove to the garage. When he arrived, the lot was strangely empty. Usually the guys would already be there laughing, drinking coffee, or arguing about engines. But this morning, only Frank's car sat in the corner. The shop door was half open and the lights were already on. Derek stepped inside slowly. The smell of oil and metal filled the air as usual, but the atmosphere was tense. Frank stood near his desk, arms crossed, staring at something on the counter. "Morning," Derek said softly. Frank didn't respond right away. He finally looked up, his eyes cold. "We need to talk." Derek nodded, setting his thermos down. "About yesterday?" Frank took a deep breath. "Yeah, about that. And about this." He pointed to a folded newspaper on the counter. Derek walked closer and saw the headline, "Local Mechanic Tied to Biker Gang Activity." His stomach dropped. "That's ridiculous," Derek said, reading the short article. It mentioned a garage employee who had financial dealings with a member of a motorcycle club. There were no names, but it was obvious who they meant. Frank crossed his arms tighter. "Somebody took a picture. You and that biker shaking hands in the lot. It's been making the rounds online since last night." Derek looked at him in disbelief. "It was just a handshake. He was thanking me." "Doesn't matter how you meant it," Frank said sharply. "People see what they want to see. Now I've got customers calling, asking if we're doing business with bikers. You think that's good for business?" Derek's voice rose just a little. "I didn't do anything wrong, Frank. I fixed a man's bike. That's all I ever do." Frank sighed, rubbing his temples. "I know you didn't mean trouble, but it's here anyway. The owner of the lot came by this morning. He said we can't afford bad publicity. He wants me to let you go." Derek froze. "Let me go? You're firing me?" Frank's eyes softened for a moment, but only briefly. "I don't have a choice." "You always have a choice," Derek said quietly. "You could stand up for me. Tell them the truth." Frank shook his head. "It won't matter. People already made up their minds. I'm sorry, Derek. You're one of the best mechanics I've ever had. But this is out of my hands." For a long moment, Derek didn't speak. He just stood there, feeling the weight of the words sink in. The garage that had been his second home suddenly felt cold and unfamiliar. He walked to his station, grabbed his toolbox, and began packing up his wrenches and screwdrivers. Each sound, the clink of metal, the zip of the box closing, echoed painfully through the empty shop. Frank stood by the door, watching, guilt written all over his face. "I wish things were different," he said quietly. Derek didn't look at him. "So do I." He walked out of the shop without looking back. Outside, the fog had lifted, but the day still felt gray. Derek loaded his tools into his truck, sat behind the wheel, and just sat there for a while, staring at the building he'd spent so many years in. He could still hear the hum of engines, the laughter, the sense of pride. All gone in a heartbeat. As he started the truck, his phone buzzed. A message appeared, "Heard what happened. Meet me at the diner." Derek hesitated but decided to go. He needed someone to talk to. And for some reason, Rex was the only person who didn't make him feel small. The diner was nearly empty when he arrived. Rex was sitting in a corner booth sipping coffee. When he saw Derek, he nodded toward the seat across from him. "Rough morning, huh?" Rex said, his voice calm but knowing. Derek sat down, sighing. "You could say that." "Got fired," Rex leaned back. "Because of me." Derek didn't answer at first. "Because people don't like what they don't understand." "I just did my job." Rex looked thoughtful. "You've got pride, man. That's rare." He paused for a moment, then said, "Look, I didn't mean for any of this to happen. But maybe it's not the worst thing." Derek frowned. "How do you figure that?" Rex smiled slightly. You said you wanted to open your own shop one day, right? Yeah, but dreams cost money, Derek said bitterly. Rex leaned forward. What if I told you I could help with that? Derek blinked. What do you mean? I've got friends, Rex said. Not the kind you're thinking of. Real people, riders, builders, mechanics. Some of them owe me favors. We could set you up somewhere. Small place to start. You've got the skill. All you need is a chance. Derek shook his head slowly. I appreciate that, but I don't want charity. It's not charity, Rex replied firmly. It's opportunity. You earned it. You fixed my bike when no one else would. You treated me like a man, not a label. That counts for something. Derek looked out the window, thinking. He didn't know whether to trust it. It sounded too good to be real. But something in Rex's eyes told him this wasn't a trick. I don't know, man, Derek said quietly. I've worked my whole life to build a reputation. Now it feels like one rumor ruined everything. Rex nodded. Then build something new. On your own terms. The waitress came by with 2 refills of coffee. Neither of them spoke for a moment. The sound of the percolator and the faint hum of an old song filled the silence. Finally, Derek said, If I did this, where would I even start? Rex grinned. Funny you ask. I know a guy who's got an old auto shop outside of town. Been closed for a year now. Needs cleaning, a few repairs, but it's got good bones. You could make it yours. Derek chuckled softly, shaking his head. You make it sound simple. Rex smiled back. Sometimes simple is all it takes. They talked for another hour, making loose plans. By the time Derek left the diner, something had shifted inside him. For the first time since losing his job, he didn't feel angry, just determined. That night, he drove out to the address Rex had given him. The road wound through the edge of town, past old farms and empty lots. Finally, he came to a small, weathered building with a faded sign that read, East Side Motors. The windows were dusty, the walls chipped. But as Derek stood there, he saw possibility. He stepped inside through the creaky door. The air smelled of oil and dust, and the sunlight coming through the roof gaps made the place glow in soft gold. He ran his hand over an old workbench and smiled faintly. This could work, he whispered to himself. As he left, his phone buzzed again. Another message from Rex told you. Some things fall apart so better ones can start. Derek stood there for a long moment, the cool evening air brushing against his face. He didn't know what the future would bring, but for the first time in a while, it didn't scare him. He looked back at the shop, the place that could become his new beginning, and smiled. Maybe losing his job wasn't the end. It was just the start of something bigger. Derek stood outside the old auto shop again the next morning. The sun was just coming up, casting a soft orange light over the cracked parking lot. The sign that read Eastside Motors was still faded, the paint peeling off, but now it looked less broken and more like a challenge waiting for him to take it on. He unlocked the front door, pushing it open slowly. Dust floated through the air, catching the sunlight. The smell of old oil and rust filled his nose, and though the place looked worn down, it felt right somehow. It felt like the kind of place where a new story could begin. He walked through the space, checking the shelves, the walls, the old equipment left behind. Most of it was outdated, but some tools could still be used. A few lifts worked. One compressor buzzed weakly when he tested it, and there was a sturdy wooden workbench in the back. That bench would be his starting point. Derek rolled up his sleeves and got to work. He spent the next few hours cleaning, sweeping up layers of dust, and clearing out old junk. Every sound echoed through the empty space. The scrape of a broom, the clatter of metal, the creak of the floor. It was hard work, but it felt good. For the first time in days, he wasn't thinking about what he'd lost. He was thinking about what he could build. Around noon, his phone buzzed. It was a text from Rex. You at the shop? Got something for you. A few minutes later, Derek heard the familiar roar of a motorcycle outside. Rex pulled up, parking near the door. He wasn't alone this time. 2 other riders came with him, both older men with calm eyes and quiet smiles. Brought you some help, Rex said as he walked in. These guys know their way around a wrench. One of the men extended his hand. Name's Cliff, he said. Used to run a shop down south before I retired. The other man nodded. I'm Joe. I heard you're trying to get this place running again. Derek shook both their hands. Yeah, that's the plan. It's a mess right now, but it's got potential. Cliff looked around, running a hand over one of the old lifts. Yeah, this'll do. Needs work, but it's solid. Rex grinned. Told you. Derek here's got skill. Just needs a push. Derek smiled a little, though he still felt strange accepting help. I appreciate this, really. I didn't expect— Don't mention it, Rex interrupted. We take care of our own, and whether you realize it or not, you've earned a place with us. For the rest of the afternoon, they all worked together. They cleared out junk, scrubbed the floors, fixed the lights, and repaired a few broken tools. The old garage slowly began to look alive again. By the time the sun started to set, the place had changed completely. They stood outside, wiping sweat and grease from their hands, looking at the shop as the light faded. Looks like progress, Joe said. More than progress, Rex replied. It looks like a future. Derek felt something swell in his chest, pride, gratitude, maybe both. Couldn't have done it without you guys, Cliff smiled. You'll pay it forward someday. That's how this works. After they left, Derek stayed behind for a while, sitting on an old stool by the workbench. He looked around at what they'd accomplished in just one day. It still wasn't much, but it was his. That meant everything. The next morning, he printed a small sign on his computer and taped it to the front window. It read, Derek's Garage, honest work. Fair price. The first few days were quiet. No customers, no calls, just the sound of tools and his radio humming in the background. But that didn't bother him. He knew it would take time to build trust. Then one afternoon, an old pickup truck pulled up. A man in his 60s stepped out, looking around before walking in. You open? He asked. Sure am, Derek replied, standing up. What can I do for you? The man scratched his head. Got a problem with my brakes. Took it to the shop in town, but they wanted to charge me more than the truck's worth. Derek smiled. Let's take a look. No promises till I see it, but I'll give you a fair deal. The man nodded. Fair deal sounds good to me. Derek got to work checking the brake lines and rotors. It was a simple fix, nothing too complicated, but he did it with care. When he finished, he handed the man the bill, half of what he'd been quoted elsewhere. The man looked surprised. You sure this is right? Positive, Derek said. No need to overcharge folks for honest work. The man smiled. You've got yourself a customer for life, son. And I'll tell my friends, too. That night, Derek sat outside the shop eating a sandwich and watching the street. The sunset painted the sky in shades of pink and orange. He felt tired, but it was the good kind of tired, the kind that comes from doing something meaningful. Over the next few weeks, word began to spread. One customer turned into 5, 5 turned into 15. People came in with their cars, their bikes, their lawnmowers, anything that needed fixing. And Derek treated every one of them with the same respect, no matter who they were. One day, while he was tightening a bolt under a truck, he heard the sound of a familiar engine outside. He wiped his hands and walked out. Rex was there again, leaning on his bike, smiling. Looks like business is picking up, Rex said. Derek nodded. Little by little. Folks are starting to trust me. Rex looked proud. That's because you've got heart. You care about what you do. People can feel that. They sat on the steps talking for a while. Derek told him about his customers, about the repairs he'd done, and about how it felt to finally be his own boss. Rex listened quietly, nodding. You know, he said after a while, sometimes life kicks you down just to show you what you're really made of. Derek smiled. Yeah, I'm starting to believe that. Then Rex said something that caught Derek off guard. There's a charity ride coming up next weekend. We do it every year. Raise money for kids in the community. You should come. Derek hesitated. You sure they'd want me there? Rex laughed. You're one of us now. Don't worry about what people think. Just ride. Derek thought for a moment, then nodded. All right. I'll be there. That weekend, he borrowed an old bike from one of his customers and joined the ride. Dozens of bikes lined up along the highway, engines rumbling like thunder. The sound alone was powerful, almost like a heartbeat. As they rode through the open countryside, Derek felt free. The wind against his face, the road stretching ahead, it reminded him why he'd fallen in love with machines in the first place. It wasn't just about fixing them. It was about what they represented: freedom, movement, life. When the ride ended, people gathered for food and music. Derek met families, kids, and other riders who thanked him for coming. For the first time in months, he felt like he truly belonged somewhere again. Later that evening, as the crowd started to thin out, Rex came over and clapped him on the shoulder. Told you it'd be worth it. Derek smiled. You were right. They watched the sunset together in silence, the sound of laughter and music still echoing nearby. Derek knew there were still challenges ahead. Bills to pay, long hours to work, but he wasn't afraid anymore. He'd built something real, something honest. And no rumor, no headline, no misunderstanding could take that away. As the sky turned dark, Rex started his bike. "Keep going, brother," he said. "This is just the beginning." Derek watched him ride off, the red taillight fading into the distance. Then he looked up at the stars beginning to appear above the horizon. For the first time in a long time, he smiled with peace in his heart. The man who once lost everything had found his way again. One bolt, one engine, one act of kindness at a time. The morning air carried a light chill as Derek unlocked the doors to his shop. A thin mist lingered over the road and the rising sun made the windows glow gold. It had been almost 6 months since he'd opened Derek's garage, and each day still felt like a gift. He flipped the sign on the door to open and turned on the lights. The faint hum of the compressor filled the silence, followed by the familiar smell of oil and metal. It was peaceful, his kind of peace. Customers now came regularly. Some drove from nearby towns just because they'd heard stories about the mechanic who treats you right. Derek never bragged, never raised his prices. He believed that if he stayed honest, people would keep coming, and they did. That morning, an elderly woman drove in with a small red car. She stepped out carefully and waved. "You the one everyone talks about?" she asked with a kind smile. Derek chuckled. "Depends on what they're saying, ma'am." "They say you fix cars better than anyone around and you don't overcharge," she said. "I like that." "Well, I'll do my best to live up to it," he replied. Her car needed a few simple repairs, a worn-out belt and a couple of spark plugs. While Derek worked, she sat in the waiting area reading a book. When he was done, he called her over, showed her the parts he'd replaced, and explained the issue in plain words. She smiled again. "You remind me of my husband. He used to fix things just because it made him happy." Derek nodded softly. "That's the best reason, isn't it?" She paid and left, thanking him more than once. As her car disappeared down the road, Derek stood outside for a moment, taking in the quiet. He'd built this life from nothing, just hard work, patience, and faith that things could change. By noon, the shop was busy again. 2 cars on the lifts, one waiting outside, and a couple of people chatting near the counter. The place buzzed with life. Then, while he was finishing up a job, he heard the familiar rumble of motorcycles outside. He looked up and smiled before he even saw them. Rex walked in first, his jacket dusty from the road. Behind him were a few of the riders who had helped months ago when Derek first cleaned up the shop. "Well, look at this place," Rex said, whistling softly. "You've turned it into something." Derek wiped his hands on a rag. "It's getting there." "Still some work to do," Rex grinned. "Always will be. That's how you know it's alive." The group stayed for a while, talking and laughing like old friends. They helped tighten a few bolts, shared a pot of coffee, and told stories about the road. For Derek, moments like these made all the hard days worth it. When business slowed in the late afternoon, Rex stayed behind. He leaned against the counter, arms folded, watching Derek close up shop. "You ever think about going back to that old garage?" Rex asked quietly. Derek looked at him. "Not really. That chapter's closed. I still pass by sometimes, though. Looks empty now." "Figures," Rex said. "Places like that don't run right without people who care." Derek smiled faintly. "Maybe, but I think everything happens for a reason. Losing that job hurt, but it pushed me to do this." Rex nodded. "You made something out of nothing. That's rare." They stepped outside, watching the sky turn orange and purple. The air smelled like rain. Rex turned to him. "You know, the guys and I have been talking. We're planning a community event next month. Food, music, bikes, cars, the works. Want to host it here?" Derek looked surprised. "Here? Yeah," Rex said. "You've earned it. And honestly, people already see this place as part of the town now. Wouldn't feel right doing it anywhere else." Derek thought for a moment. "All right, let's do it." Over the next few weeks, preparations began. Flyers went up around town. Local businesses offered to help, and neighbors stopped by to lend a hand. It was more than just an event. It was a celebration of community, trust, and second chances. When the day finally arrived, the shop lot was packed. Rows of motorcycles and classic cars lined the street. There was music, barbecue, and laughter everywhere. Kids ran around with ice cream cones and old friends reunited over coffee and stories. Derek moved through the crowd, greeting people, checking in on things, and fixing little issues as they came up. He couldn't believe how alive everything felt. Midway through the afternoon, a car he recognized pulled up at the far end of the lot. For a second, his heart skipped. It was Frank, the man who had fired him months ago. Frank stepped out, looking around awkwardly. He spotted Derek and walked toward him, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. "Didn't expect to see me, huh?" Frank said, forcing a small smile. "Can't say I did," Derek replied carefully. "What brings you here?" Frank looked around at the crowd. "I heard about this event. Then I heard your name. Figured I should come see for myself." He paused, his eyes softening. "You've done well, Derek." "Real well," Derek nodded. "Tried to make the best of it." Frank hesitated, then said, "I owe you an apology. I shouldn't have let you go like that. I knew you didn't do anything wrong, I just didn't stand up when I should have." For a moment, Derek didn't say anything. He could see the guilt in Frank's eyes, but instead of anger, all he felt was peace. "You did what you thought was right at the time," Derek said calmly. "No hard feelings. Honestly, losing that job might have been the best thing that ever happened to me." Frank smiled faintly. "Glad to hear that." He looked around again. "You've built something real here. You should be proud." "I am," Derek said. "And I hope you are too. You gave me my start, remember?" Frank nodded slowly, shook his hand, and left soon after. Derek watched him go, feeling a sense of closure he didn't even realize he'd needed. As the sun began to set, Rex stood beside him, watching the crowd still laughing and talking under the golden light. "You handled that well," Rex said. "Not everyone could." Derek shrugged. "Anger doesn't fix anything. Building does," Rex smiled. "You've come a long way, brother." They stood there quietly for a moment. The smell of grilled food and the sound of laughter filled the air. A kid ran by, holding a toy wrench, pretending to fix a bicycle. Derek couldn't help but laugh softly. Later that night, after everyone left and the lot grew quiet again, Derek sat on the front steps of the shop. The sky was full of stars, and the sign that read Derek's Garage glowed faintly under the streetlight. He thought about everything that had happened, the firing, the rumors, the struggle to rebuild. It had all led him here to this exact moment. He heard footsteps and looked up. Rex was standing there with 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to Derek and sat beside him. "Think you'll ever slow down?" Rex asked. Derek smiled. "Probably not. There's always something to fix." They sat there in silence, sipping their coffee, watching the last cars fade down the road. After a while, Derek said, "Funny thing, huh? How one act of kindness can change everything." Rex nodded. "You fixed a bike, and in return, life fixed itself." Derek looked at the shop again and whispered, "Guess it really did." The night air grew cooler, but he didn't mind. He had everything he needed: a shop, a purpose, and people who believed in him. Sometimes, he thought, life doesn't fall apart. It just falls into place.